Hey guys, in this video we're going to be going back and revisiting the Sota Toys Now Playing Presents Series 3 Dogs, Soldiers, WereWolf. The original review of the Sota Toys Now Playing Presents Dogs, Soldiers, WereWolf was back in October 24th, 2012. And actually, funny enough, it was also a spooky spot. And I thought leading up to the month of Spotober and having a look at some of the spooky videos that are going to be coming up very, very soon, I would maybe transition to those videos by having a look at a previous spooky spot subject here. Let's get some dimensions going for the Now Playing Presents WereWolf. Taking the dimensions from him standing on the display stand, the WereWolf is about 8.5 inches tall. If you are also wondering, the backdrop in which he stands on top of, is a little over 8 inches, about 8.25 of an inch tall. This figure came in two different variants, one of which being the brown variant that we're looking at right now, and then the other one was a gray variant that had some really nice shades of white and light and dark gray. Unfortunately, though, over the course of having this guy in my collection, both figures have suffered some real nasty spells. In fact, one could say that I've had quite a love and hate relationship with a figure that I would still consider probably one of my top 10 favorite figures of all time. Unfortunately, though, I don't have the gray figure anymore, and I'll talk about that in a second. Let's go ahead and get him off the display stand, which is actually one of the biggest problems I have with this figure. We'll just kind of put the figure over here just to the side. And let's have a look at the display base that he comes with. A really nice interior house diorama here, where you've got the bullet-riddled back portion of the drywall of the house, and then you've got some really nice boards running across there. Scattered across this kind of wood flooring here, you've got some innards and blood and guts and all that good stuff, and then of course you've got a few scattered bullets across the floorboards as well. It does have two considerably large peg points, which is really one of the big problems I have with this figure, is the fact that he has the toughest time not necessarily standing. The biggest problem, at least from a display standpoint, is getting him on these little pegs and the pegs not breaking. The pegs are so large. How large are they? They're so large that my gray variant figure, one of the few things that, well, one of the many things that happened to the gray variant figure that I had, and the reason why I don't have it anymore, is the figure toppled over and shattered the large pegs, because the pegs are so large and sunken in to the socket portions of the feet. The figure toppled over and just obliterated these pegs. These pegs broke right off and actually ended up being lodged inside the foot of the WereWolf, and I had to take some pliers and kind of fish those out. And then unfortunately, on top of that, the figure's head broke, the leg broke, I even feel like the arm had broke too, and it just got to the point where fixing it, I could glue it, but it just wouldn't be the same as it was. So I think I might have even given it away. I don't know. But of the two, I think I prefer the brown version, the brown variant, the regular version of the WereWolf versus the gray version. But there is the backdrop. A really neat looking backdrop, but I would say though, the pegs are way too big. They should have been smaller. It should have been a lot easier to attach the figure to the top, because even putting the figure into the actual stand, you really have to force the figure on top of the pegs. And even I'm apprehensive doing so, because I feel like the peg is going to break in the process and get lodged into the foot, the same way as the gray WereWolf did. So we'll just put like the display stand over there for the time being. This figure has fared a little bit better. Unfortunately, though, it suffered also a bit of a defeating blow, because its lower foot shattered. They do connect, like the lower leg portion connects by a peg to the calf area of the leg. This, however, shattered. I don't know if it twisted or I don't know if it fell, but the peg inside broke right off. And I tried to fix just the peg. I tried to maybe find like a metal peg that I could actually run through there so I could still get the articulation to work. It didn't work, so unfortunately I had to glue it. And I think I actually had to glue it a couple of times because the glue just wouldn't set the leg properly. And I found the foot just kept coming off. So I had to actually glue it a couple of times. So it's unfortunately it's not as pristine as it was originally. But I'm going to try my best to do whatever I can to salvage this patient so that I don't have to forfeit another werewolf. Again, this is one of my favorite figures of all time. It's probably within my top 10 favorite figures. And with Halloween right around the corner, I thought it was a prime time to have a look at this guy once again. It comes with two head variations, I should say. One of which being the closed head, which has some fantastic sculpting there in the fur, as well as in the eyes, and especially the very large teeth. Oh, grandmother, what big shiny teeth you have. All the better to rip you to shreds. I'm sorry, what, grandmother? No, nothing. Again, great looking sculpt. It's got some multiple different washes to it. It kind of looks like it's got some light brown, it's got some dark brown in there. It looks like it might even have a bit of a gray incorporated into there as well. The heads aren't not the easiest to change out either. Instead, what I usually favor is I favor this head more so, and that's generally the head I keep it with. You can see the differencing between the two. It's really not that much different. If you really look at this part, it's about the same on both figures. I don't think the eye area is all that much different. It's really more so the lower mouth, the jaw portion, that is so much more exaggerated, obviously, on this figure head than on this head here. Again, you can go with either or, but to be perfectly honest, I'm digging this head sculpt much more, and that's all the more reason why I keep this head sculpt on the figure. I love also that they've got some a bit of like a sheen that they've added to the tongue to make it look like it's wet. It's got a very lanky body. I suppose we could talk about this just in a quick second because there's one thing I don't want to also forget. His other accessory is a severed hand, or more importantly, a severed forearm. You can see that it's still somewhat wet, and it doesn't really have any other place. I suppose you could try to put it into his hand, and just kind of drape it in there, or you could just have it scattered across the bloody remains on the actual floorboard base. The hand is actually nicely sculpted. The stump portion leaves something to be desired because it doesn't quite look so much as a severed stump as it almost looks like a candy. That's a candy you should not be eating. But for all intents and purposes, it's not a bad looking hand sculpt. You've got a little bit of the kind of almost like a brown or gray that they've added to there as well, just to kind of get to the little areas such as the veins and little bones and stuff like that to the hand. Not a bad looking hand. Okay, I didn't want to forget that because I knew I probably would leave that out and somebody would say, what about the hand? What about the hand? Well, there's the hand. Okay, so going back to the figure itself, again, a glorious looking specimen. Still wish I had the gray one, but I'm so glad that at least I had the brown one somewhat intact for the time being. I do prefer really the lankiness of this particular figure. It doesn't really have a whole lot in the way of articulation, which we will talk about in a second, but he more than makes up for it in a fantastic looking sculpt. The musculature on this figure is quite nice. All the little areas and the sculpting, just probably one of the best Sota toy releases that I've seen. Done a couple on this channel, but I think the WereWolf by far is my favorite. Again, you've got all the cool little musculature that's been sculpted into the areas such as the legs, of course the upper torso, very, very muscular. But I do love that they've added this little wrinkling to it, that it's not just a very smooth looking presentation of the arms. Instead, they've kind of given it a cross hatching, almost very similar to an elephant hide. And they've got some fantastic looking shading that they've incorporated in there as well. Some dark browns on top of the medium browns really resonates for all this extra detailing to shine through. Very nicely concealed, of course. You've got the WereWolf privates, of course, in the movie. Also done the same thing as well. And lower portion of the boots or foot portion, of course, of the WereWolf have that little fur cuff to them, which looks really quite nice. Like I said, he is very limited in his posability. He doesn't really have a whole lot, but he's more a posing figure. He's a figure that you want to just put basically as is. I mean, you could do a little things here and there to kind of change up the way he's posed, but really, for a figure that looks this good, you really just want to display him as such, and then just be a figure that you walk by periodically. Just kind of put your finger up to your face and say, kind of head to toe, up and down, look at the figure and say, wow, that's a great looking figure. And unfortunately, this figure has been relegated to a plastic Ziploc bag prison for so many years. It was actually just for the fact that we are getting around to October again that I started kind of going through my collection once again, and I found this guy, and I thought, wow, why am I not displaying this guy on a shelf for how great this figure looks? By the way, his posability, let's talk about that right now. His head is on ball joints, so it rotates all the way around. Again, you would just unpeg that, but the nature of the way these pegs are, the pegs feel like they're almost a very dense plastic and then yet somehow still brittle. For how quickly this shattered and how quickly it shatters on the peg on the display stand, I'm very apprehensive about taking the head off and switching the head out. But again, like the head sculpt, for as good as it is, this one, I don't know I would have any reason to want to change it to this one. The collar portion, let me just also mention that as well. So this is kind of a ball joint, so you've got the hinge up and down, it rotates all the way around. And then you've got this kind of rubbery fur collar that they've put over top of the existing one here. About that's the only thing I would say I'm not a big fan of this area right here, because it really detracts from the great shading that they've put on the lower portion of the fur collar, that this big splotch of this beige kind of paint really detracts from this part right here. You get a lot more of that from the back where you've got more of that lighter shading. Right here, it's a very predominant just a big splotch right there, and I really don't think it's necessary. I don't think that would be on all the figures. It was probably put there as like a QC, an accidental, just a paint application that was added there. I don't know if that would be the case with all the, all the fur areas. Then you get to his arms. His arms hinge outward, but if you've ever kind of collected the old NECA figures where they used a clear peg, I don't know if these would use clear pegs. I'm thinking they use like a black, dense plastic peg, but I feel like the resiliency for how long these will last. Like this particular arm, I can't hinge outward. And there's just a little bit, okay, there we go. It does hinge outward, but I was very apprehensive of doing that because this figure, the figure's arms have always been kind of stiff, and I didn't want to jeopardize having any of those break, especially on camera. Oh, I just jinxed it now by saying that. Hands rotate all the way around. And again, great looking sculpting there on the hands. These giant oven mitt sized claws. You can just imagine the damage it would do just raking across somebody's face or torso. Very, very large, sharp claws sticking out from the tips of the fingers. You got your waist swivel. And again, I get it. Waist swivels, they're questionable at times because, again, like you turn the figure this way, you're going to see a big, very, very apparent cut where the torso doesn't quite match to the lower half. It really intends to have the figure leaning this way to give you a more smoother transition from the torso to the leg area. Then you get down to the legs. The feet themselves do this. That's all they do. This one can't do that, again, because the nature, I've just, again, glued that. I can't do anything with it. But I mean, really, why would I need to rotate the foot this way? It doesn't look right. It doesn't look natural. So why would I do that? Again, like, there's the back of the figure. Just super cool detailed figure. Not the greatest in the way of posability, granted, yes, but I think he more than makes up for it with a fantastic sculpt. The Sota Toys Now Playing presents Series 3, Dogs, Soldiers, WereWolf is a love-hate relationship for me. Walking away, I absolutely love this figure, but boy, do you ever put me through such stresses, WereWolf. Between broken pegs, limbs breaking off, having to glue lower halves, and just outright scrapping the original, well, the variant version. Luckily, I still have the brown release, and I'm happy that I kept this one over the two. The gray one wasn't so bad, but just for the amount of surgery and repair that I had to do with that other figure, there just wasn't much left of that figure after it was all said and done. This is one of those fantastic looking figures that unfortunately, just to the nature of the way that the company is, Sota Toys, I don't even think they're really producing much in the way of figures anymore. Of course, the value of this particular figure has skyrocketed, and all the more reason that if something does unfortunately happen, and I've jinxed myself for saying that, if something ever happened to this figure, I would try to repair as much of it as I could so I didn't have to outright buy another figure, because the figures nowadays are super expensive. They're probably about $200 to $350 if you could actually believe it. This figure is a great looking figure. It doesn't have a lot of articulation, granted, no, but it has one heck of a sculpt on a werewolf. It's one of my favorite werewolf pieces of all time, and I would even say as well, it's probably one of my top 10 favorite figures of all time as well. The display stand, I can tell you right now, is a nightmare. Pegging the figure into the display stand can prove to be tricky, as you're really having to put a very large peg into the undersocket of the foot, and the whole time you're doing it, you're feeling as if the peg is going to break. Same thing can be said for the limbs themselves, especially in the shoulder portion. Moving those shoulders from time to time, especially as what you saw in the video, I felt like that peg was going to break off, and I'm hoping the longer I have this figure, I hope to have it really indefinitely. I hope those pegs don't ever break on me. I'd hate to think that I would have to go the same route of gluing the arms, the same route that I ended up going with the leg. The leg doesn't bother me as much, but if I ever had to replace the arms or repair the arms, that would make me very sad. Still, a fantastic looking representation of a werewolf. It's probably one of the best werewolf figures I think I've ever seen, and I'm so glad I still have this one in my collection. Today, once again, we were looking at the Sota Toys Now Playing Presents Series 3 Dog Soldiers Werewolf. Of course, this kind of is a bit of a precursor to what we will be getting in the month of Spotober, as we have a look at other spooky figures, collectibles, and all that other good stuff. If you guys haven't had a chance yet to subscribe to this channel, what are you waiting for? Hit that little subscribe button down below. Of course, like I said, the month of spooky spots and all the spooktacular videos will be right around the corner from this, as we are now kind of getting into the month of October, or I should say Spotober. As always, guys, thanks for watching, as you always do. Thanks for liking these videos. Thanks for commenting down below. I always like getting into discussions with you guys and talking about figures, because this is still something that's very, very passionate to me, is collecting and displaying figures. I don't display them as much as I used to, but I certainly still love collecting action figures. And though I wouldn't say this is an action figure, this is one of my personal favorites of all time. Thanks, guys. I'll see you next time.